2 days before my wedding, I came home to find my spare room completely rearranged. The furniture I had chosen was pushed against the wall. A stranger's suitcases were stacked in the corner, and my fiancé was standing in the doorway, holding a box of his mother's things, telling me this was just temporary, that I needed to be more understanding, that family always comes first. I had spent 3 years turning that house into something I was proud of. I had worked double shifts to pay for the floors, the fixtures, the fresh paint that still smelled new. And in the space of one afternoon, the man I was about to marry had handed a piece of it to someone else without asking me a single question. The worst part was not the suitcases. The worst part was the look on his face when he said it, like I was the unreasonable one. Like 3 years of my life and 2 days before my own wedding was the perfect time to learn who I was actually marrying. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something honest. If you came home to find your space rearranged 2 days before your wedding, and the person who did it looked at you like you were overreacting, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet and kept the peace? Or would you have finally said the thing you had been swallowing for years? Think about that as I take you through every single thing that followed. Because what happened over the next 2 weeks changed the direction of my life in ways I am still grateful for today. My name is Lauja, and I need you to understand something before I start. I am not someone who looks for conflict. I have spent most of my adult life being the person who keeps things together, who smooths things over, who says it is fine when it is not fine, because the alternative always felt like too much trouble. I was raised to believe that love meant patience, that family meant sacrifice, and that a good woman did not make everything about herself. I believed that for a very long time. Longer than I should have. This is the story of how I stopped believing it. I was 31 years old when I got engaged to a man named Marcus. We had been together for 4 years and lived together for 3 of those years in a house that I had purchased on my own. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. The house was mine. I had saved for the down payment for 5 years, working as a nurse through long shifts that left me exhausted in ways that went beyond the physical. I had bought the house 2 years before Marcus, and I became serious enough for him to move in. When he did move in, I had already renovated the kitchen, replaced the flooring in the main rooms, and repainted the interior from top to bottom. Marcus helped me choose paint colors and moved some boxes. That was the extent of his contribution to the physical house. He paid a portion of the monthly bills, which I appreciated, but the mortgage, the insurance, the major repairs, and the structural decisions were mine. None of that ever felt like a problem in the early years. We had a good life together. Marcus worked in logistics management and kept reasonable hours. I worked shifts that sometimes stretched into nights and weekends, but I loved what I did. We cooked together on weekends, took small trips when my schedule allowed, and talked about a future that included a family of our own. He proposed on a quiet evening at home, not a big spectacle, just a ring and a question and both of us crying a little. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I loved him, and I believed that the man I loved understood who I was. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in early autumn. We had kept it modest, around 60 guests, a venue attached to a garden that I had fallen in love with the moment I walked through it. My mother flew in from another state, my closest friends were flying in from different cities, and I had spent months carefully coordinating every small detail in the narrow windows of time that my job allowed me. The week before the wedding was supposed to be quiet. I had taken time off from work specifically, so I could finish last-minute details, pick up my dress from the seamstress, and spend some peaceful time with the people I loved before the biggest day of my life. That peace lasted exactly until the Thursday before the wedding. I had been out that morning running errands. I picked up the custom napkin rings I had ordered, stopped by the florist to confirm the delivery time, and grabbed groceries for a dinner I was planning with my mother and 2 of my closest friends that evening. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a car I did not recognize parked beside Marcus's truck. I assumed it was someone from his office who had stopped by. I went inside through the front door and heard voices in the hallway. Marcus came out of the spare room and met me before I could get past the living room. His expression was the kind I had learned to read over 4 years. It was the expression that meant he wanted something, but was not sure how to start. He told me his mother was here. He said she had been going through some things, that her apartment situation had become complicated, that it had all happened very fast, and he had not had enough time to explain it properly. He said she was going to stay with us for a little while, just temporarily, and that he had set her up in the spare room. He was speaking quickly and calmly at the same time, the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed the explanation, but not the apology. I asked him when he had planned to tell me. He said he was telling me now. I asked him when she had arrived. He said earlier that morning. I stood very still in my own hallway for a long moment. Then I walked to the spare room doorway. His mother, Margaret, was sitting on the edge of the bed I had bought for that room, surrounded by her belongings. There were suitcases, bags, a rolled-up carpet, a small lamp, a framed picture already on the windowsill, and a wooden box of what looked like kitchen things. She looked at me and gave a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She said she hoped I did not mind, that Marcus had told her it would be fine, that she would be no trouble at all. I looked at the room. I looked at the windowsill where she had already placed her picture. Then I looked at Marcus, who was standing behind me. I did not yell. I did not say anything harsh in front of her. I walked to the kitchen and asked Marcus to come with me. He followed, and I closed the door quietly. Then I told him exactly what I was thinking. I told him that in 2 days I was supposed to walk down an aisle and marry him, and that he had made a major household decision without a single conversation, without asking, without even a text message to warn me. I told him that the spare room had been prepared for my mother, who was arriving the next morning, and who I had already told she would have her own space. I told him that I did not understand how any part of this had seemed acceptable to him. He said his mother needed help, and that he could not turn her away. I said that was a conversation we should have had together. He looked at me with that expression again, the one that made me feel like I was making a scene about something small. He said I was being cold. He said his mother was family. He said I would understand better when I was a mother myself. I had been with this man for 4 years, and I had never wanted to walk out of a room as badly as I did in that moment. My mother arrived the next morning, the day before the wedding. She had taken an early flight and was carrying a small gift bag and her warmest smile. When I told her that the spare room had been given to Marcus's mother without any discussion, her expression shifted in a way she tried to hide but could not. She did not say anything harsh. She simply asked where she would be staying, and I told her she could have my room and I would sleep on the couch. She told me absolutely not. We ended up booking her into a hotel 2 miles from the house, and I paid for it out of my own pocket. My mother held my hand in the kitchen while Marcus was somewhere in the house and said very quietly, "Make sure you are choosing this with your eyes open." I told her I was handling it. She did not look entirely convinced. The rehearsal dinner that evening was at a small restaurant I had reserved months earlier. It was supposed to be 20 people, immediate family, and the wedding party, a warm and simple evening. Margaret came to the rehearsal dinner. She sat at the end of the table near Marcus's aunts and uncles and spent most of the dinner telling stories about Marcus that were designed to remind everyone in the room that she had shaped the man I was marrying. That was not what bothered me. What bothered me was when she leaned over during dessert and told me, with a bright and brittle smile, that she was sure I would love having her around once I got used to it. She said Marcus had always needed her nearby. She said she knew I worked a lot and that it would be nice for Marcus to have company. I want to tell you what that sentence did to me. It did not make me angry in a hot way. It made me cold in a way I had not felt before. Because in that sentence was an entire structure of thinking that she had never bothered to hide. Marcus needed her. I worked too much. She would be the one who was really there. The house, the wedding, the marriage in her mind, she was already at the center of all of it. I barely slept the night before my wedding. I lay in the dark for a long time thinking about every moment over the 4 years with Marcus that had felt slightly off, but that I had explained away. There was the time he told his family our financial details without asking me. There was the time he brought his sister to a vacation we had planned as a couple and did not mention it until the night before. There was the time he told me his mo. They thought I was too career-focused, and instead of defending me, he had asked me whether I thought she had a point. Each of those moments I had found a reason to move past. He was close to his family. He was thoughtful about their feelings. He was not trying to undermine me. That was what I told myself. That was the story I kept choosing. But lying there the night before my wedding, I could not keep choosing it. because the pattern was too clear. He made decisions about my life and my space and my time, and he always found a way to make my discomfort seem like a personal flaw. In the morning, I got up, showered, and started getting dressed. My two closest friends, Camille and Dana, came over early to help me get ready. They knew something was wrong. Camille had been with me the night before when Margaret made her comment and had given me a look across the table that said more than words. Dana had been my closest friend since college and could read my face in a way that was almost uncomfortable. I told them both what I was feeling. Not all of it, not in a way that would have made them panic, but enough. Camille said, "Whatever you decide today, we are behind you." Dana said the same thing without words by simply squeezing my hand and then going back to fixing my hair. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon. By 11, I was dressed and in the car. By noon, I was at the venue with my mother, my friends, and the quiet knowledge that something in me had shifted during the night. I did not know yet what I was going to do with that shift, but I knew it was real. The ceremony itself was both the most beautiful and the most surreal 2 hours of my life. I walked down the aisle in a dress I had loved for months. I stood across from Marcus, who looked at me with what I believed was genuine love. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We were pronounced married. I smiled through all of it because some part of me still hoped that I was wrong, that the pattern I had seen was something I could talk through with him, that we could build a real partnership now, that we were starting something officially together. I kissed my husband and heard 60 people applaud and felt nothing I had expected to feel. At the reception, Margaret sat at the family table and at one point gave a short speech that no one had asked her to give. It was framed as a tribute, but it was really a story about Marcus, told in a way that positioned her as his primary emotional support and anchor. She mentioned his first girlfriend, a childhood illness, a difficult year at work, and how she had been the one who had helped him through all of it. She did not mention me by name in the first 40 seconds of the speech. When she did mention me, she said she hoped I would learn to appreciate how sensitive Marcus was. I watched my mother's face across the room. I watched Camille press her lips together. I watched Dana look at the table. We left for a short honeymoon 4 days later. 2 nights at a nearby place, modest and quiet, which I had always liked more than anything elaborate. Marcus seemed relaxed and happy, and I tried to meet him there. We talked some, laughed some, and I told him gently that I wanted us to find a way to handle the living situation when we got back. I said his mother needed to have a real timeline, that I needed to know the plan, and that we needed to make decisions together going forward. He said, of course. He said he understood. He squeezed my hand and said we were a team. I chose to believe him. We came home to a changed house. Margaret had rearranged the items on the kitchen counter. She had moved a set of decorative containers I had placed near the stovetop to the back of the counter and replaced them with her own things. She had installed a small shelf in the hallway near the front door without asking. She had placed a framed photograph of Marcus as a child on the living room side table. These were not dramatic changes individually, but together they sent a message I could feel in my chest. She was making herself permanent. When I talked to Marcus about it that evening, he said she was just trying to feel comfortable and that I should not read too much into small things. When I asked about the timeline, he said it was a sensitive time for her and he did not want to pressure her. I asked him directly when she would be moving out. He said he did not know yet. I told him that was not something I could accept without a clear plan. He told me I sounded like I was issuing demands. I told him I was describing what I needed in my own home. He went quiet. Then he said he thought I would be more supportive once we were married. There was that sentence again, the one that suggested I would eventually become someone different, someone more like what he needed. I had heard a version of it before and it had always slid past me. That night it did not slide past. I called my mother that evening after Marcus went asleep. I told her everything. Not just the recent things, but the pattern I had finally stopped explaining away. My mother listened without interrupting for a long time. When she spoke, she did not tell me what to do. She simply said that she had raised me to know the difference between a hard beginning and a wrong direction. And she said it was okay to know the difference. Over the following 2 weeks, Margaret made herself fully at home. She began cooking in the kitchen in the mornings and leaving things on the stove. She began commenting on how I arranged the refrigerator. She began asking Marcus questions about household finances in front of me, questions that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with keeping herself in the loop. One afternoon, I came home from a long shift to find her on the phone with one of Marcus's relatives, describing the layout of the house and saying they were setting up a proper family home now. I stood in the hallway and listened to that sentence and felt something finally, completely, go quiet inside me. I had a conversation with a lawyer friend of mine named Priya 2 days later. Not in a formal way, just a coffee and a conversation. I told Priya the situation. I told her that the house was mine, that Marcus was on the mortgage as a cosigner only, and that I had documentation of every major renovation and payment I had made before and during our relationship. Priya listened carefully and then told me something that I should have looked into long before. She said that the nature of the agreement I had with Marcus regarding the house had implications I should fully understand, and that it would be worth sitting with a proper family attorney to make sure I understood my position clearly. She also said that any guest residing in a home for extended periods without agreement from the owner could create complications worth being aware of. She kept it practical and calm, and I left that coffee feeling like I had finally turned on a light in a room I had been navigating in the dark. I booked an appointment with a family attorney named Carol 2 days after that. I did not tell Marcus. I went on a morning when I was between shifts and sat in a clean office while a calm woman walked me through the reality of my situation. She confirmed that the house was primarily mine based on the purchase history, the mortgage documentation, and the financial record. She also gave me clear information about how to protect that position going forward. I left her office feeling something I had not felt in weeks. I felt informed, and being informed made me feel like myself again. The shift that followed was not dramatic. It was internal and practical. I stopped apologizing for needing clarity. I stopped softening every request with a dozen qualifications. I started writing things down, not as a threat, but because I had learned that when things go unwritten, they become invisible, and when they become invisible, they can be rewritten by whoever speaks loudest. I sent Marcus a written message, calm and specific, laying out what I needed. I said that by the end of the following month, I needed a clear move-out date for his mother. I said that I was happy to help with resources, referrals, and a reasonable transition period, but that my home was not a long-term solution for someone else's housing situation without a formal and agreed-upon plan. I said this was not negotiable, and that I was sharing it in writing so there was no confusion. I sent it while he was in the next room, so I would not lose my nerve in the middle of a conversation that would become about my tone instead of the substance. He came to find me about 10 minutes later. His expression was not the one I expected. He was not calm. He said I was treating him like a business problem. He said his mother was going through something real, and I was handling it like a transaction. I told him I had been more than patient, and that patience without communication was not the same as support. He said his mother had cried when she saw the message on his phone, which he had apparently shown her. I sat with that information for a moment. He had shown his mother a private message I had sent him. He had shown her a message about her own living situation inside my house. I looked at him and asked him why he had done that. He said she deserved to know where she stood. I told him that message was between us and that showing it to her had been a choice that told me something important. He left the room. I sat on the edge of the couch and looked at the living room that I had built piece by piece, and I understood something with full clarity for the first time. The problem was not Margaret. Margaret was doing exactly what someone does when someone else opens a door and tells them to walk through it. The problem was Marcus. Marcus had been opening doors into my life for years and never once asked if I wanted them opened. 2 days later, Camille called me. She asked how I was. I told her Hone. SDLY. She listened and then said something I have thought about since. She said you have been the glue so long that he forgot the whole thing was your house to begin with. I asked her what she thought I should do. She said she thought I already knew. I told her I was afraid. She said that was allowed, but that afraid and wrong were not the same thing. I went back to Carol, the attorney, and had a longer conversation about my options. I am not going to give legal advice here because I am not a lawyer and every situation is different. What I will say is that the conversation helped me understand what was mine, what was shared, what was protected, and what I needed to be clear about going forward. I left with a clearer sense of my own position and what steps would be available to me if I chose to take them. That weekend, something happened that moved everything forward faster than I had planned. Marcus's family had organized a gathering. His parents, meaning his father and Margaret, who were separated but still attended family events together, his 2 sisters, an uncle, and several cousins. It was held at his eldest sister Renata's house. I went because I was trying. I was genuinely still trying. I sat at Renata's kitchen table and listened to a conversation that I was included in on the surface, but excluded from in every meaningful way. The family talked about Christmas plans, about next year's family vacation, about a property his father owned upstate that had apparently been in conversation for some time. Then someone, one of the cousins, asked Marcus directly when he and Lauja were planning to have children. Marcus laughed and said soon probably. He had not said that word to me, not once, not recently, not in any conversation we had had in the last few months. I did not react at the table. I continued eating and smiled at the right moments. But inside I was cataloging. Because I had heard that word, soon, used the same way he used other words like temporary and of course, and we'll figure it out. Words that sounded like commitments but were really just pressure valves. Words designed to buy time and close conversations without resolving anything. On the way home in the car, I asked Marcus when he had decided we were having children soon. He said it was just something people say. I told him that it was not just something I say, that a decision like that was something we would make together and not announce at his cousin's kitchen table as a casual fact. He told me I was overanalyzing. I told him I was paying attention. There was a long silence. Then he said I had changed since the wedding. I told him I had not changed. I had finally stopped pretending. That was the sentence that cracked everything open. When we got home that night, Marcus and I had the conversation we should have had 2 days before the wedding. It lasted a long time. I said things I had been carrying for months. He said things he had apparently been carrying too, including that he felt I had never fully accepted his family, that I kept the house like a boundary instead of a home, that he sometimes felt like a guest in his own marriage. I listened to all of it. Then I said something honest and simple. I said that the house had always been mine, and that he had moved into it, which meant it could not have been his home in the same way it was mine, and that difference was something we had never actually talked about. I said that I had tried to share it fully and lovingly, but that sharing something fully was different from handing it over without conversation. And I said that what had happened with his mother had made something clear to me that I had been slow to see. He asked me what I was saying. I told him I was saying that I needed us to actually build a shared life, not one where his comfort and his family's access were the default and my needs were the thing we got around to eventually. I told him I needed to know if he was able to do that, truly. Not in theory, not in the rehearsal dinner version, but in the actual daily reality of our marriage. He did not answer right away. He sat with it for a while. Then he said he thought he could. And I told him I needed more than thought. Margaret moved out 6 weeks after our wedding. The conversation that produced that result was not easy, and Marcus was not fully on my side during it, but he was more on my side than he had been before. I believe the written message I had sent, and the clarity with which I had held my position, made it harder for the situation to remain comfortable for everyone at my expense. She moved into an apartment in a building not far away, which was where she had been looking before the situation with her previous apartment had accelerated. She had not been completely without options. She had simply been given a more comfortable one. In the months after Margaret moved out, Marcus and I went to couples counseling. I want to be honest about what that was like because I think people in storytelling sometimes make growth sound clean and resolved. It was not clean. There were sessions where I felt heard and sessions where I felt misunderstood. There were conversations where Marcus showed up genuinely and conversations where he retreated into justifications. I stayed because I was not giving up on the marriage without giving it a real chance. But I stayed with my eyes open. I did not pretend that the things I had seen had not been real. About 4 months into counseling, our therapist, a quiet and perceptive woman named Dr. Abrams, said something in a session that I have kept with me. She said that the most common issue in the families she worked with was not conflict. It was the assumption that love made communication optional. She said that assumption hurt the person who was most comfortable with silence the least and hurt the person who needed clarity the most. She looked at me when she said it. I nodded. Because I had spent 4 years inside that assumption, and I had mistaken my own patience for peace. Marcus made changes, genuine ones, not just the kind that last until the next pressure point. He started having direct conversations with me before making family decisions. He started holding his own boundary with Margaret about what she was and was not included in. He started using the word no in a way that was new, not cruel, but clear. I saw those changes and I gave them credit. At the same time, I kept my own clarity. I stopped softening my needs. I stopped apologizing for wanting things to be agreed upon. I stopped letting the assumption that I would adapt become the foundation of every plan. There was a moment about 7 months after the wedding that I want to tell you about because it captures something important. Marcus's father called him about the upstate property that had been mentioned at the family gathering. It turned out the family had been quietly discussing whether the property could be converted into a shared family investment. The discussion had apparently included Marcus as a potential financial contributor. No one had told me about any of this. When Marcus mentioned it to me, I asked him how long this conversation had been happening. He said a few months. I asked him when he had planned to bring it to me. He said he had not thought it was serious enough yet. I looked at him steadily and asked him whether a financial decision involving our household was something he thought he could assess as serious or not serious on his own. He said no. He said I was right. He said he would tell his father he needed to discuss it with his wife first. And he did. I know he did because I was present when he made the call. That was progress. Small, specific, real progress. There were also things that did not change easily. Margaret still called Marcus more than felt appropriate for someone who had their own apartment and their own life. She still occasionally said things to me that were wrapped in warmth but carried a point. Comments about the house, about my schedule, about how Marcus seemed stressed. I learned to respond to those comments differently than I used to. I stopped absorbing them and I started naming them. Not loudly, not in a way that created a scene, but clearly. When she said Marcus seemed stressed, I would say that we were both working through some things and that we appreciated her concern. The conversation would stop there. She was a person who depended on her comments landing and creating a reaction. When they did not land, she moved on. I want to talk about my mother for a moment because she played a quiet and important role in this whole period. My mother flew back out for a visit about 5 months after the wedding. We walked around the neighborhood one evening while Marcus was at work. She asked me how things really were. I told her honestly. I said that things were better, but that I was still watching, still learning who Marcus was in the part of marriage that the relationship had not shown me yet. She said that was wise. She said that the person someone is under pressure was the truest version you would ever see of them. She said she had seen who Marcus was under pressure in the days around my wedding, and that I was right to pay attention to that version. Then she said something else. She said she was proud of me for not disappearing into the situation. She said she had watched women she knew, good women, patient women, lose themselves trying to maintain a peace that was never really shared. She said she had been afraid for a moment that I would do the same. She said she was glad I had not. I held on to that. I am still holding on to it. Roughly a year after our wedding, something shifted again. Marcus got a new role at work that involved more travel. During one of his longer stretches away, I spent 2 weeks managing the house, the mortgage, my shifts, and the general weight of our life on my own. It was not easy, but it was also clear. Everything funk. Beyond, the house was calm. I slept well. I felt organized and in control of my time and my space. I noticed that, and I kept that noticing private, but it told me something. It told me that the exhaustion I had been carrying was not only from work. Some of it had been from managing constant uncertainty in my own home. When Marcus came back from the travel stretch, he noticed the house felt different. He asked me about it. I told him honestly that I had found it peaceful. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. He said he thought he had not always made our home feel like mine. I told him that was exactly right, that he had not, and that I needed him to work on that actively and not just recognize it occasionally. He said he would. I told him I would be watching for whether he did. By the time the first anniversary of our wedding came around, Marcus and I were in a different place than we had been on the wedding day. Not perfect. Not the way anniversary social media posts make marriage look, but real. I felt like I was married to a person who was trying to understand rather than manage me. That was not everything, but it was something I had not had during the wedding itself. I also want to tell you what happened with my house, because it is still mine. The mortgage is still primarily in my name. The documentation still shows my payment history. After talking with Carol, the attorney, and with Marcus, we formalized an agreement about the property that reflected reality honestly. It was not combative. It was just clear. It acknowledged that I had built this before him and that any shared investment would need to be structured as such. Marcus agreed. In agreeing, he showed me something I had needed to see. He could put my reality first when he was given a clear and honest way to do that. I also want to tell you what happened with Margaret. She came to our anniversary dinner. Marcus invited her, which I had complicated feelings about, but I chose to focus on the dinner itself. She was quieter than she had been before. Whether that was because of the months of changed dynamics or something else I could not say. But when she left that evening, she hugged me and said, in a way that felt slightly less performed than usual, that she thought I was good for Marcus. I thanked her. I did not offer more than that. I have learned that warmth and access are not the same thing. I can be warm without giving access. Margaret had learned that too, slowly, whether she wanted to or not. There is a version of this story where I ended my marriage the morning of my wedding day. There is a version where I let everything stay unclear and uncomfortable and kept telling myself it was fine. There is a version where I collapsed under the pressure of everyone else's feelings and stopped having my own. I have thought about all three of those versions. I am grateful that none of them is what happened. What happened is messier and slower and more real than any of those. I chose to stay, and I chose to be honest at the same time. That combination was the hardest thing I have done. But it was also the thing that saved me from losing the person I had spent 31 years becoming. I learned something in the year after my wedding that I wish someone had told me much earlier. Patience is not a virtue when it becomes silence. When you stay quiet long enough, the people around you start to believe that quiet means yes. They start building their assumptions into your life like furniture they expect you to arrange around. When you finally speak, they call it aggression because it interrupts the arrangement. But the arrangement was never yours to begin with. The speaking is not aggression. The speaking is just the truth arriving late. And even late, the truth still changes things. Even late, it is worth saying. The house still smells slightly of the paint I put on the walls 3 years before Marcus moved in. Sometimes I walk through the hallway in the morning before anyone else is awake, and I remember choosing that color. I remember the weekend I spent on a ladder, painting alone, listening to music, feeling like I was building something that was entirely and completely mine. That feeling did not disappear when Marcus moved in. It did not disappear when his mother arrived with her suitcases. It did not disappear during any of the difficult months that followed. I protected it. Quietly, firmly, and in the end, successfully. I protected it because I had learned something important. The things we build with our own hands, our homes, our peace, our sense of self, those things are worth protecting. And protecting them is not selfishness. It is the most honest act of love you can offer, because a person who has protected themselves has something real to give. A person who has given everything away and called it love has only learned to disappear. I am Lauja. I have not disappeared, and I am not planning to start. I want to ask you something. Before you go, have you ever stayed quiet in a situation because speaking up felt like it would cost you something, only to realize later that staying quiet had already cost you more? If that resonates with you, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Not because your story needs to match mine, but because I believe that when we name the moments where we chose ourselves, we remind each other that it is allowed. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me where you are in your own story. I read everyone.